How's going on here? Every rivalry starts somewhere. Fire and Ice, Rock, Paper and Scissors, Me and Taxes, and so on. And endless debates have started because of rivalry. Tell me, which is worse, pee or poo? And tell me why you're wrong. But the one from today is different. This rivalry reeks of ignorance and pure arrogance. Today, we are talking about the story of Nintendo and Sega. Got messed up. And it's not even the right book, I wanted to talk about Bionicle. The gaming industry was for a year or two. E3, the game released for the Atari 2600 and it was a flop. A game crash was happening right in front of our eyes, and for a period of time, no one made an attempt to bring back games to the market. Also because boohoo, Atari went bankrupt and shut down, no one wants to sacrifice their market for a potential failure. But when we go to Japan, this is a completely different situation. Nintendo, who previously made Donkey Kong in 1980, released the Famicom in Japan, and it was a success there. The lack of competition definitely contributed to the success of the Famicom. I mean, we had some competition like the pre-release SG-1000 by Sega, but who cares about some company that called themselves blind? With the success in Japan, Nintendo was ready for an international release of the console, but they needed a new name. Americans can't read Famicom without spilling their beans. In 1984, on the Consumer Electronics Show in Las Vegas, the Nintendo Advanced Video System made their first and only public appearance. The prototype of the American Famicom took inspiration of consoles such as the ZX Spectrum, and everyone can agree of how dog shit it is. What? Nintendo was already planning a console as shit as the Wii U since the 80s? This design didn't attract anyone, especially when the game crash was relatively recent. Later in the same year, Nintendo introduced the NES in a weird way, with the release of arcade cabinets called Nintendo Versus System, which included some Famicom games. On CES 1985, the final design was shown publicly, and the Nintendo Entertainment System, or NES, released in North America on October 1984 and September 1986 in Europe, with the following games: 10-Yard Fight, Baseball, Clu Clu Land, Duck Hunt, Excitebike, Golf, Chiramite, Hogan's Alley, Ice Climber, Kung Fu, Pinball, Soccer, Stack Up, Tennis, Wild Gunman, and Wrecking Crew. The NES was initially commercialized as a toy and not a game console, to not piss someone on the store, and because of that, they included ROP as an accessory with the toy. We don't know when Super Mario Bros. Released in North America, but it's estimated that released around this time. And that's it. You already know how this game was a success and boosted Nintendo to the mainstream, and how it became an icon and received 2 more games this generation. That's all you need to know, I'm not mentioning his name ever again. Around the same time, Sega brought their newest console, the Master System, internationally. In North America, it didn't do so well since it came out so late and because their mascot was ass. For many people, the Master System was just a Nintendo ripoff. However, in Europe, we ate this shit up. It was actual competition with the NES here, even with Sega's burger-eating monkey with the game that's revered by so many people but deep down is just okay. I didn't want it to be that personal. Atari also rejoined the market somehow. I wonder if they lasted a week. Some notable examples of games Nintendo released this generation, we had the first The Legend of Zelda. This game was one of the first to include save files. You could save your progress, you don't need to have your NES turned on for 3 days straight and have an outfire shortly after. Metroid was a fun one, it made you feel like a rat in a labyrinth, but this is a lost gem, no one remembers this game. Also, we have some non-Nintendo examples, such as Final Fantasy made by Square, one of the first RPG games that's wildly popular to this day. Dragon Quest by Enix, Mega Man by Capcom, Metal Gear by Konami, Bomberman by Konami, Castlevania by Konami. Jesus, Konami was packed back then. I often forget that the company that gave us Metal Gear Survive made good games. But when we shift our attention to the arcades, oh boy, we had our first fighting game available to play. In 1987, Street Fighter was released. While the first entry of the series isn't often talked about, this was the beginning of something big. This is the golden age of games, at least the first notable one. Before this, we had some random Mototon cubes, but now stories could be told and played in an amazing way. This was also the era of video game magazines. The most notable ones include Electronic Gaming Monthly and Nintendo Power. Nintendo ran their own video game magazines with tips, guides, Q&As, ads, posters, ads, game announcements, and did I even mention the abundance of ads? Enough with the Nintendo dick sucking, a major problem would emerge not long after all of this. In 1988, Sega released a Mega Drive in Japan. It was 16 bits, the double of the NES and Master System. This console was more powerful than the competition and ran games similar to arcade games. Altered Beast was a launch title that helped the console showcase its capability. This game, and the console in general, was aiming for a more mature audience, but that wouldn't last long. And we also had the PC Engine aka TurboGrafx 16 roaming around shelves, so this wasn't good. And what was Nintendo's response? A f***ing brick. Yeah, the original Game Boy released in 1989 with the amazing gimmick of playing games whatever you want. It doesn't matter if it's on the plane or while being hostage, you could play this thing everywhere. And hey, the launch lineup was pretty good, and bundling up Tetris with the console was a smart decision. It appeals with everyone of every age. Tetris is the video game. The Game Boy was an automatic success everywhere, even where Sega reigned. Speaking of Sega, around 1990 they ran a contest for a new mascot since, well, this is not a mascot worthy of competing with Nintendo. Sonic the Hedgehog was born, and this is what Sega needed, a good mascot. Sonic 1 released in 1981 and it was a big hit. For better or for worse, for me it was for the worst, I hate Sonic. With the Mega Drive aka Genesis in the US being more powerful than the NES, Sega saw the opportunity to launch a campaign bashing Nintendo. They directly called Nintendo lame. And even after Sonic's release, Sega made a commercial saying that Sonic was faster and how the console could keep up with him, while Plumber Boy was gross, fat and slow. This was a golden age of advertising. You can't reach these levels of competition in television anymore, unfortunately. After all of this, Nintendo couldn't stay quiet. It wouldn't take long until Nintendo released their next home console. Super Famicom in Japan, this console was double the power of its predecessor and could even render 3D polygons with the help of the Super FX chip. This was the Super Nintendo Entertainment System, aka SNES. This was a major blow for Sega, since Nintendo had the most badass fastest game as the launch title. F-Zero proved that Sega's blast processing was bull, and the 4th generation had officially began. And oh, you think Sega would stop right there? Oh no, we got the Game Gear, the Game Boy's competitor. Blood was spilled on the development of this. This console had one advantage over the Game Boy and one advantage only. It could play with color. See, the Game Boy only played with base colors, but it doesn't matter when the games are good. The Game Gear on the other hand, not so much. The games were nothing special, the console was pricier and the batteries would die in less than a day. This console was the literal definition of ass. Well, at least you had an option, you pick the Game Boy or the Game Gear, simple as that. Why do you always come back? The Atari Lynx. The image speaks for itself. Getting back into home consoles, Nintendo, Sega, NEC, who made the PC Engine, weren't the only ones. Oh, far from that. This generation was packed with new consoles. For example, the Neo Geo by SNK, originally released as an arcade cabinet with its own cartridge-based games, a domestic version released in 1990, and this was the most expensive console this generation, retailing for $649.99 in the US. Well, you're getting arcade quality games on your home, so I guess it makes sense. The cartridges are the size of a GameCube, or even bigger. I've never seen these things running around in the wild, but they're big as f***. This console gave us such classics as Fatal Fury, Metal Slug, The King of Fighters and Samurai Showdown, so looking at the library, it was made more for hardcore arcade fans. Speaking of arcades, around this time, Street Fighter 2 released to the masses, and this was a success like nothing before. This was a far more successful sequel than its predecessor, with even receiving a movie, but we don't talk about that. Another fighting game that was making the rounds in 1992 was a little game called Mortal Kombat, and when we played Street Fighter, we were greeted with a more cartoony fighting game with almost no blood in sight. But Mortal Kombat was nothing like that. It was as gory as it could be, with characters dismembering each other and blood. So much blood. And parents were not happy. Of course they weren't happy. 3 red pixels appearing on my kid's game? God damn. And it got worse when it released for home consoles. The SNES release not so much, but the Genesis release had a special code with blood in it. But this wouldn't affect the gaming industry until shortly after, but we'll get into that in a few. Around 1991, CD-ROMs were becoming a big deal. Come on, you could storage tons of data in a simple disc instead of an expensive tape that couldn't hold much stuff. And this is where we got our very first CD-based console, the Philips CDI. And pff, this console is just the epitome of boring. It plays CDs, great, but when this is the type of shit you have, I'm sorry, not eating it. Wait, friend, is this Zelda? In 1982, Sega released its first add-on for the Genesis in an effort to capitalize on the success of CDs and win the attention of gamers, but in the end it was for nothing. This is a Sega CD or Mega CD in Europe. This can't be real, like instead of a new console they just barfed a CD add-on? But later on you'll see this is not the only time they did something like this. And Nintendo was supposedly doing the same thing, but with Sony. Yes, lads and gals, I'm talking about the add-on console that was capable of playing SNES games and CD games, the Nintendo PlayStation. Nintendo partnered up with Sony to create a hybrid console that could play both cartridges and CDs. The project had a bright future, but fell off when Sony wanted to control the licensing part of the CD portion of the console. Nintendo tried working around this, but Sony pooped on them. Nintendo knew that Sony would backstab them sooner or later, so Nintendo partnered up with Philips to create a new CD add-on that ultimately never released. On CES 1991, Sony announced that they were partnering with Nintendo to create a new add-on for the SNES, and guess what? The very next day, Nintendo didn't talk about the add-on, and when asked for it, they said that the disc add-on was being developed with Philips, not Sony. Feels bad, man. This was bad, even worse when the add-on never released and instead we got terrible games for the CDI of existing Nintendo properties. I mean, it can't be that bad, right? Come on man, I just wanted to play some CDI games, I never thought that this would happen. No! But Sega officially f***ed up when they released Night Trap for the Sega CD. The game is nothing special, just a simple FMV game with girls doing girly stuff. But again, parents and the FTC weren't satisfied with this, so it's time, let's take it to court! The principal games were Mortal Kombat, Night Trap and Doom. Everyone remembers Doom, right? It was also part of the trilogy of the Forbidden 93, that's how I like to call them. You know, 93, because this all happened in 1993. So, it happened. Bad takes and opinions of people that couldn't care less if Sonic 2 came with a box were thrown around. Sega took some L's and the ESRB was reinstated as the rating system for games. This was a big L for companies, but it was inevitable, it needed to happen. I already talked about this before. I like the adults only rating for some reason. What? A new console called the 3DO created by 7 big companies just released and has 32 bits? Plays 3D games, uses CDs and is directly calling it the SNES and Genesis toys on their commercials? Damn, this is not good. Maybe Nintendo and Sega met their maker. Are they teaming up together to take down the 3DO? Don't miss out the big battle between the SNES, Genesis and 3DO, cause we won't. It was alright, I was hoping for some cheapness and humiliation. I was hoping for some $2.99.
$2.99?
That's what I wanted.